Okay, so in this video, we're continuing our discussion of AUC Section 315 for understanding the entity and assessing the risk of material misstatement. So now we are diving into understanding the entity's internal control. And we see here that we're required to obtain an understanding of their internal control relevant to the audit. So what's important here is relevant to the audit. So they might have several controls that might be financially related, but they might not be relevant to our audit, and in that case, we don't necessarily have to gain an understanding of those controls. But just like everything else in the audit, it's up to our professional judgment to control or to determine whether a control is individually or in combination with others relevant to our audit. And there's a lot of information here about understanding the entity's internal control, and it could probably be an AUC section all on its own. There's just a lot of stuff. So this will certainly be a multi-part series. And then first, in sections A49 through 74, they give a good overview of how we might go about gaining an understanding of the entity's internal controls. And then in these next several sections, they kind of dive into the pragmatics of doing it. And so the next video will be of a multi-part series of this section. But for the purposes of this video, I think it's we can have an overview of what we're looking at whenever we're understanding the entity's internal controls. So next we see that the nature and extent of the relevant controls is important for us to understand. And we see here two important words, the design and whether or not they've been implemented. So when we're understanding the internal controls of the entity, we want to understand how they're designed and also that those controls have been implemented. So they've put in, or it's important that they have a system and internal controls that makes sense, but then also it's important that they have actually implemented that system. So this is what we call normally call walkthroughs, where we first understand their design, but then we walk through the controls to see that they're actually doing the controls that were designed. And it's important to know that this is different from determining whether the controls are effective. That determination comes out if we test internal controls. And this is all really complicated. So as it relates to controls, there's three main qualities that we understand or that we are, in a sense, testing. So when we're understanding the entity, we're only responsible for understanding the design and implementation. If we were to test controls, we would determine whether they are effective. And so until we've actually tested controls, we have to assume that they are not effective. So in a sense, our control risk is high, or at least maximum. But for purposes of our understanding the entity, we need to understand how the controls are designed or implemented, and this is not for the purpose of determining whether they are effective. It's very important to understand. So in determining the design and implementation of the controls, we will be looking at each component of the control of their internal controls, and they have laid out 5 different components to internal controls that we have to understand or gain an understanding of the design and whether or not those controls have been implemented. So first is the control environment. And in a later video, we will go into detail about these. This is more or less to give an overview of what we have to gain an understanding of. The next is the entity's risk assessment process, the information system and the related business processes relevant to the financial reporting and communication, the control activities relevant to the audit, and also the monitoring of controls. So that lays out the overview of what we are going to gain or work toward to understand how to gain an understanding of internal controls. And so next we're going to dive into, in the next video, we'll dive into this particular section. And there's a lot here, but it gives us an overview of internal controls and gaining an understanding of them.